Hulk Hogan may be a wrestling legend, but not everyone's waving the flag of nostalgia. Here's why some Black Americans won't be mourning his legacy. In this video, we dive into Hulk Hogan's controversial past, beyond the ring. From firing a black brand ambassador for his beer company in the early 2000s to allegedly disapproving of his daughter's black boyfriend, there are long-standing issues that continue to shape how many in the black community feel about the wrestling icon today. Expect honest commentary, cultural context, and an unfiltered look at how race, reputation, and remembrance collide in the world of sports entertainment. He was a legend in red and yellow. The larger-than-life icon who slammed giants, flexed on global stages, and told a generation of wrestling fans to say their prayers and take their vitamins. But for many Black Americans, the legacy of Hulk Hogan isn't about nostalgia, it's about a wound that never fully healed. A voice that once rallied millions now sounds hollow to those who remember something else. Something deeper. Something darker. Because for all the headlines about his championships, his comeback appearances, and his role in shaping the spectacle of professional wrestling, there's another side to the Hulk Hogan story. A side that doesn't make the highlight reels. One that lives in quiet conversations, behind-the-scenes testimonies, and the collective memory of a community that has, time and again, seen its humanity dismissed in favor of pop culture comfort. And this time, some are choosing not to forget. It begins with a moment, caught not under the glow of a WWE spotlight, but on a leaked recording that would eventually shatter Hogan's public image. In 2015, transcripts of a private, racist rant emerged in which Hogan used the N-word multiple times and admitted he'd be racist, to a point, while complaining about his daughter Brooke dating a black man. The fallout was swift. WWE terminated his contract. His Hall of Fame page was taken down. Corporate sponsors vanished. But for many Black fans, the damage wasn't new. It was just public confirmation of what had been whispered and speculated about for years. Because this wasn't just one moment of indiscretion. This was the culmination of a pattern, subtle and not-so-subtle instances that painted a portrait of a man whose off-screen reality stood in sharp contrast to the unity and inspiration he supposedly represented in the ring. And when that curtain was pulled back, many Black wrestling fans didn't feel shocked. They felt seen. They remembered. They remembered that in the early 2000s, Hogan reportedly fired a black brand ambassador working for his beer company simply because he didn't want a black man representing his product. That story never made mainstream news. But in the barbershops, forums, and message boards where Black fans talked, it stuck. It joined a growing list of moments that colored how they viewed the so-called immortal. They remembered how Hogan, when speaking about Black wrestlers, often defaulted to stereotypical language, complimenting strength and athleticism but rarely intelligence or storytelling. They remembered how long it took for WWE, under Hogan's era, to elevate Black champions to main event status. They remembered how rare it was to see Black wrestlers celebrated for more than just their muscle. But this isn't just about what Hogan said or did. It's about how it felt. It's about the pain of watching someone you grew up idolizing use language that degraded people who looked like you. About being told to get over it because he said sorry. About watching a PR redemption arc unfold without any real reckoning. Hogan did apologize, eventually. But many questioned the sincerity, the timing, and the motivation. Was it about growth, or about getting back into the Hall of Fame? That's where the conversation turns uncomfortable. Because for some fans, especially those outside the Black community, it's easy to compartmentalize. To separate the wrestler from the man. To look back fondly on childhood memories of WrestleMania moments and ignore the transcript that reads like a slap in the face. But for Black Americans, those two versions of Hogan can't be separated so easily. Because they weren't allowed to separate their Blackness from their identity when they walked into a room. Or when they were judged for who they dated. Or when they were told to tone it down, or smile more, or be more professional. So when Hulk Hogan returned to WWE events, quietly at first, then as a host, then re-inducted into the Hall of Fame, the reaction wasn't universal applause. It was divided. There were boos beneath the cheers. Side eyes behind the camera pans. And in many black households, there was silence. Not the kind that forgets, but the kind that refuses to pretend. That chooses not to clap for a man who never really clapped for them. This isn't about cancel culture. It's about consequence. It's about accountability. And it's about truth. Because the truth is, Hulk Hogan was more than a wrestling character. He was a symbol of American masculinity, of white heroism, of 80s and 90s era sports entertainment. And symbols matter. They shape narratives. They define who gets to be the good guy. And for too long, that definition excluded black men. It's why, even now, when tributes pour in praising Hogan's legacy, many black fans can't join in. Not because they want to be bitter, but because they remember how it felt to be invisible in that same world. How it felt to idolize someone, only to realize they wouldn't have wanted you dating their daughter. That pain doesn't vanish just because time passes. That wound doesn't close just because someone said I'm sorry when the cameras were rolling. Some say we should forgive. That everyone makes mistakes. But forgiveness, especially in communities that have been systemically marginalized, isn't cheap. It's earned. It comes after reflection, reparation, and sincere change. And many feel Hogan never did the work. He didn't engage with the black community. He didn't address the systems he benefited from. He didn't sit with the people he hurt. Instead, he waited. And when enough time passed, he stepped back into the spotlight, older, quieter, but still unrepentant in the eyes of many. So, no, not everyone is mourning Hulk Hogan. For some black Americans, his death, or his departure from public life, isn't a tragic loss. It's a complicated moment. A chance to reflect. A chance to say what they were never allowed to say when the red and yellow was flying high. They don't hate him. They just don't miss him. They don't deny his impact on wrestling. They just refuse to forget his impact outside the ring. Because memory is powerful. And when it comes to legacy, especially one as iconic as Hulk Hogan's, the full truth matters. Not just the parts that fit neatly into tribute packages and Hall of Fame reels. This is that truth. This is the other side of the story. The one that rarely gets told. And it's time we tell it. For many wrestling fans, Hulk Hogan was their introduction to sports entertainment. His presence dominated the screen, and his larger-than-life persona defined what it meant to be a superstar in the 1980s and 90s. But what was marketed as inspiration to millions often came at a cost to others. While fans of all races lined up to cheer for the Hulkster, black fans increasingly began to notice something unsettling. The ring may have been full of heroes, but very few of them looked like them. It's not that black wrestlers didn't exist. They did. But they were rarely positioned as the centerpiece. More often than not, they were cast as comic relief, mid-card placeholders, or, worse, stereotyped characters whose value was based on exaggerated tropes. And at the top of this hierarchy was Hulk Hogan, a man celebrated as the American ideal. Blonde, muscular, charismatic. The white savior archetype in neon spandex. For decades, he was the measuring stick. But that measuring stick came with an unspoken message: this is what greatness looks like. And if you don't look like this, you don't belong at the top. It wasn't until much later that fans began to unpack the systemic exclusion within wrestling. The slow climb of black champions, the token pushes, the unspoken bias in backstage decisions. And while Hulk Hogan didn't create this system, many saw him as a symbol of it. He was the face of the machine. And when the audio leak exposed his racist comments, it confirmed what many black fans had long suspected, that the image wasn't just flawed, it was false. Yet, the wrestling industry never fully reckoned with this. Hogan's fall from grace was temporary. His reinstatement into the WWE Hall of Fame came without public dialogue, without town halls or open discussions about what his comments meant to black fans. WWE issued statements about second chances and learning from mistakes, but whose voices were centered in that healing process? certainly not the ones most impacted. For many, this wasn't redemption. It was erasure. Black wrestling fans were once again asked to put their pain aside. To move on. To be the bigger person. But that burden is heavy. It's the same weight carried in classrooms, workplaces, and everyday life, being asked to smile through microaggressions, to accept apologies never truly offered, to forgive because it's more convenient for others. Wrestling was supposed to be an escape. But for some, it became just another reminder of where they stood. In the years since the controversy, new generations of black wrestlers have risen. Kofi Kingston, Big E, Bobby Lashley, Bianca Belair. These are athletes who broke barriers, redefined narratives, and created moments of joy and pride for black fans. But those moments came in spite of the system, not because of it. And the shadow of Hulk Hogan's legacy still loomed large. Because every time Hogan returned to television, even if just to wave or deliver a nostalgic promo, it reopened a wound. It signaled to many that popularity trumps principle. That the smiles of the majority mattered more than the pain of the minority. That some icons are too big to be held accountable. It's important to understand that this pain isn't rooted in bitterness. It's rooted in disappointment. Hulk Hogan wasn't just a wrestler. He was a cultural figure. An ambassador of entertainment. A household name. And when someone with that kind of influence reveals racism, not just in words, but in actions, it cuts deep. Not because it's surprising, but because it affirms a painful truth: even heroes can hold contempt for the people who cheered for them. There's also the question of how legacy is curated. Who gets to decide what parts of a public figure are remembered? Who writes the obituary in the public consciousness? If we only celebrate the wins, but never acknowledge the wounds, are we preserving history, or rewriting it? For many Black Americans, remembering Hulk Hogan honestly means holding both truths. Yes, he was a trailblazer in wrestling. But he was also a man who, in a private moment, revealed a heart hardened by prejudice. And when given the chance to fully make amends, to engage, to listen, to rebuild trust, he chose silence over substance. That silence speaks volumes. In a world where Black voices are too often dismissed or diluted, choosing not to mourn Hulk Hogan isn't an act of hate. It's an act of clarity. A refusal to participate in the mythology that erases the pain behind the persona. It's a declaration that Black fans don't need to conform to the mainstream's version of memory. They can honor their truth, even if it's uncomfortable for others. And that truth matters. It's the kind of truth that doesn't fit neatly into tribute videos or highlight reels. It's raw and unresolved. But it's real. Real like the father who watched wrestling with his son, then had to explain what the N-word meant when the transcript surfaced. Real like the Black wrestling fan who grew up idolizing Hogan, only to feel betrayed by the man behind the mask. Real like the community that's always been part of wrestling's heartbeat, but rarely part of its headlines. That's the story many are telling now. Not to cancel. Not to destroy. But to reclaim. To say, this is how it felt. This is what we remember. This is why we won't pretend. Hulk Hogan's passing, whether symbolic or literal, is prompting conversations. About race. About accountability. About how we honor or critique those we once held up as larger than life. And for Black Americans, especially those who have long been expected to clap quietly from the back of the room, this is a moment to stand in the center and speak. Not to disrespect death or deny humanity, but to tell the full story. Because if legacy matters, then so does honesty. As tributes continue to pour in from fans, fellow wrestlers, and media outlets hailing Hulk Hogan as one of the greatest to ever step foot in the ring, there's a growing sense of unease among those who remember a different version of the story. A version not found in WrestleMania highlights or action figure packaging. A version that speaks not to the pageantry of performance, but to the pain of perspective. Because it's easy to elevate legends when you're not the one they dismissed. In sports entertainment, image is everything. It's a business built on illusion, the crowd, the lights, the storyline. But behind that curtain, real people with real lives and real identities carry the burden of navigating a system that hasn't always welcomed them equally. For Black performers, the struggle has often been uphill, fighting not just for airtime, but for dignity. Not just for wins, but for worth. And while Hulk Hogan stood as a beacon of wrestling's golden era, many Black fans and wrestlers alike watched from the sidelines as their stories were sidelined, their potential diminished. There are wrestlers today, powerhouses in their own right, who will quietly admit that during Hogan's reign, there was an invisible ceiling. One that was higher for some and lower for others. Take, for example, the trailblazers like Junkyard Dog, Ron Simmons, or Ahmed Johnson, Black superstars who had the charisma, the crowd reactions, and the physicality. Yet, they were rarely positioned as long-term main eventers. They were often transitional champions, comedic relief, or obstacles for white babyfaces to overcome. Hogan never had to navigate those limitations. He was the standard, and the system was designed around him. This isn't to say Hulk Hogan alone orchestrated that imbalance. But when you sit at the top of an empire, you either challenge the structure, or you benefit from its flaws in silence. Hogan, by most accounts, did the latter. Wrestling legends like Booker T have publicly acknowledged the sting of Hogan's words. Booker, a Hall of Famer and six-time world champion, once infamously said Hogan's name in a live promo during WCW and immediately regretted it. Years later, when asked about Hogan's comments, he responded with the type of grace that only comes from enduring a lifetime of microaggressions in silence. But even grace doesn't erase memory. Many younger Black wrestlers, those who grew up watching wrestling, dreaming of one day becoming champions, found themselves wrestling with conflicted emotions when Hogan was brought back into the WWE fold. Some were asked to shake his hand backstage. Some were told to publicly support his return. Others stayed silent, knowing that to speak out could cost them opportunities in a business that still plays favorites behind closed doors. This pressure to forgive and forget is not unique to wrestling. It mirrors broader patterns in society, where Black people are often expected to absorb racism, turn the other cheek, and move on for the sake of unity. But unity without truth isn't healing. It's erasure. And the wrestling world is only now beginning to reckon with the weight of what's been erased. So when WWE aired montages of Hogan smiling, flexing, posing with children, or sharing the ring with fellow legends, many Black fans were reminded of what wasn't shown: the transcript, the words, the context, the consequences. They saw the performance, but remembered the pain. And it's not just about Hogan himself. It's about what his story symbolizes: the ongoing tension between spectacle and substance. Between honoring history and being honest about it. Between what the fans are told to cheer, and what they feel in their gut. Because when a hero falls, the question isn't whether he had great moments. The question is, who got left behind in the story he helped write? Hogan's defenders often argue that the man made a mistake, that he apologized, that he deserves redemption. And perhaps, in a personal sense, he does. But redemption is not owed, it's earned. And in the eyes of many Black Americans, that journey never truly began. There were no open conversations. No public acts of reconciliation. No deep acknowledgement of harm. Only silence, staged appearances, and business as usual. Contrast that with how Black athletes, entertainers, and public figures are often treated. A single misstep can lead to suspension, lifetime bans, and public condemnation. There is little room for grace. And even when apologies are made, redemption is a distant dream. The double standard is loud, and for those who see it every day, Hogan's return felt like yet another reminder that privilege protects its own. This is why some people won't be mourning. Not because they're heartless. Not because they don't recognize talent. But because mourning requires respect, and respect requires truth. The truth is that Hulk Hogan meant a lot to many fans. He brought joy, excitement, and unforgettable moments to millions. But he also inflicted harm. He revealed a side of himself that, for many, shattered the illusion forever. And while that may not cancel his contributions, it complicates them. To grieve honestly is to hold both truths. To say, yes, this man changed wrestling. And yes, this man deeply offended a community that helped build the very industry he thrived in. Wrestling has always been a reflection of society, its values, its contradictions, its struggles. And in this moment, as tributes flow and debates rage, the industry must decide what kind of legacy it wants to uphold. One that centers comfort, or one that embraces complexity. For now, Black fans will remember. They'll remember what was said, what was done, and what was never truly addressed. And in that memory, there is power. Power in choosing not to forget. Power in telling the full story. Power in defining legacy not by convenience, but by truth. Because the truth, unfiltered, unedited, and unapologetic, is what many have been waiting to hear. And they won't let it be silenced again. The conversation surrounding Hulk Hogan's legacy is not just about a man. It's about a mirror, a reflection of who gets grace and who gets erased. Of who is allowed to be complex and who is reduced to a caricature. For Black Americans, that mirror has often shown the hard truth: their stories, their pain, their contributions have long been edited out of the mainstream narrative. And in that silence, a different kind of memory is preserved, one that resists rewriting, one that refuses to let discomfort be buried under applause. In the days following Hogan's reinstatement to WWE and his gradual return to televised events, a quiet defiance began to rise online. Black fans, artists, commentators, and former wrestlers took to social media, not with rage, but with remembrance. They didn't need to scream. They simply posted the transcript. They shared their personal reflections. They reminded the world that, while many